The telegram arrived 3 weeks before she did, and Calvin Brooks held it in his calloused hands like it might disappear if he gripped too tight. The paper, thin as hope itself, in the Montana Territory, spring of 1882. He had written the letter months ago, when the loneliness of his ranch pressed down harder than any blizzard, when he realized the cattle and horses made poor company for a man of 27 who still had dreams bigger than survival. Now, Winifred Waters was coming from Philadelphia, and he had no idea if she would take one look at his dusty ranch outside Palisade and run screaming back to civilization. The stagecoach rattled into town on a Tuesday afternoon, wheels churning up dust that hung in the air like a curtain between past and future. Calvin stood outside the general store, his dark hair freshly cut, his best shirt laundered and pressed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a wild Mustang testing a fence. He watched 3 men disembark first, then a woman with a tired face and 2 small children, and then her. Winifred Waters stepped down from the coach with one hand clutching a worn leather satchel and the other holding a single envelope, and Calvin felt his breath catch somewhere between his lungs and his throat. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, with auburn hair pinned back in a simple bun and gray eyes that swept the dusty street with something between fear and determination. Her dress was plain brown cotton, patched at the elbows and faded at the hem, and she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make dignity out of nothing. Their eyes met across the distance, and Calvin saw her shoulders straighten just slightly, saw her chin lift in that universal gesture of courage gathering itself. He crossed to her in a few long strides, removing his hat as he approached, suddenly aware of how rough his hands looked, how much dirt seemed permanently embedded in the creases of his palms. "Miss Waters." His voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw by nerves. "Mr. Brooks." She said it as a statement, not a question, and he saw her eyes taking in his face, comparing it perhaps to whatever image his letter had painted. "I recognize you from your description. Let me take your bag." He reached for the satchel, and she handed it over with a nod of thanks. The bag weighed almost nothing, and Calvin felt a twist in his chest as he realized this might be everything she owned in the world. "Did you have other luggage? This is all." Her voice was quiet but steady, and she clutched that envelope tighter, the paper crumpled from handling. "I sold what I could before leaving Philadelphia. It seemed wiser to travel light." Calvin wanted to ask what had brought her to this desperate measure. What circumstances had led a woman to answer a stranger's advertisement for a wife? But the questions felt too large for a dusty street with curious townspeople already watching from windows and doorways. Instead, he gestured toward where his horse and wagon waited. "The ranch is about an hour's ride. I thought we could get supplies first if you need anything, or we could head straight out if you prefer." Winifred glanced around at the small frontier town, at the handful of weathered buildings that comprised Palisade's entire downtown, at the massive sky stretching endlessly overhead. "I would like to see what will be my home, Mr. Brooks. The supplies can wait." They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, the wagon wheels creaking steadily beneath them, the Montana landscape rolling out in waves of spring grass and distant mountains. Calvin kept sneaking glances at her profile, at the way she held herself perfectly straight despite the wagon's jostling, at how her eyes tracked across the horizon, like she was memorizing every detail. "It is very empty," she said finally, and he could not tell if she meant it as criticism or simple observation. "There's a kind of freedom in all this space," Calvin offered, then worried it sounded foolish. "Room to breathe, room to build something. And you built a ranch." She turned to look at him fully for the first time since they left town, those gray eyes direct and searching. "Your letter mentioned cattle and horses. How long have you been here?" 5 years. I came after my father died, took the inheritance and headed west to start fresh." He guided the horses around a rocky patch, comfortable with this story he had told himself 100 times. "Built the house first winter, nearly froze doing it. Started with 20 head of cattle, now I have close to 300. That's impressive growth." There was genuine interest in her voice, and Calvin felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. "It has been hard work, but honest. The land is good here, plenty of water from the creek that runs through the property. I have 2 ranch hands who help with the bigger jobs, but mostly it is just me." He paused, then added quietly, "It got lonely. That is why I wrote to the agency." Winifred nodded slowly, her fingers still wrapped around that envelope. "May I ask you something directly, Mr. Brooks?" "Calvin." "Please. And yes, ask anything. Why did you not find a wife here? Surely there are women in Palisade or in the surrounding ranches." It was a fair question, and Calvin appreciated her directness. "There are a few, but they are mostly married or spoken for. And the ones who aren't, well, we have known each other since they were children." It felt strange to suddenly see them differently. "I wanted someone new, someone who chose this life deliberately rather than just being born into it. Someone desperate enough to travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger." Winifred's voice held no bitterness, just that same steady observation of facts. "I prefer to think of it as someone brave enough," Calvin said, and he meant it. He glanced at the envelope still in her hands. "That letter you're holding, is it from the agency? The travel documents?" For the first time, something flickered across her composed face, something that might have been pain or memory or both. "No. This is from my sister. It is all I have left of her." Calvin waited, sensing there was more she might say if he gave her space. "Eliza died 6 months ago. Consumption. She was 19. Winifred's voice remained steady, but Calvin heard the weight beneath it, the grief held carefully in check. "We had been on our own since our parents died when I was 17 and she was 14. I worked as a seamstress, but when Eliza got sick, the medical bills took everything. After she died, I could not afford our room anymore. I had no family, no prospects, and then I saw your advertisement. I am sorry about your sister." The words felt inadequate, but Calvin meant them deeply. He knew about loss, about the hollow spaces people left behind. "She told me to go west if anything happened to her. She loved adventure stories, tales of the frontier. This letter was written 2 days before she died, and she made me promise I would not stay in Philadelphia out of loyalty to her memory. She wanted me to live." Winifred carefully tucked the envelope into her dress pocket, like placing something precious into a safe place. "So here I am, fulfilling that promise." The ranch house came into view over the next rise, and Calvin felt a surge of anxiety about how she would see it. The structure was solid. 2 stories of timber he had cut and hauled himself, with a wide front porch and real glass windows he had ordered from back east at considerable expense. The barn stood behind it, newly painted red, and the corrals stretched out to the right where several horses grazed peacefully. It was not grand, but it was sturdy and real, built with his own hands and sweat. "Oh," Winifred breathed, and Calvin turned to see her face had softened, something like relief washing over her features. "It is beautiful. You think so?" He could not quite keep the hope from his voice. "I think it looks like a home." She met his eyes, and for the first time she smiled, just a small curve of her lips but genuine. "A real home." Calvin helped her down from the wagon, his hands careful on her waist, aware of how fragile she felt beneath the worn fabric of her dress. She stepped back quickly, a blush coloring her cheeks, and turned her attention to the house like studying it might steady her nerves. "Let me show you inside." Calvin grabbed her satchel and led the way up the porch steps, suddenly seeing everything through her eyes and finding it wanting. The furniture he had built was rough. The curtains were old feed sacks he had washed and hung. The whole place had the unmistakable stamp of a bachelor who did not know the first thing about making a house feel like a home. But Winifred walked through the front room with her hands clasped in front of her, taking in the large fireplace, the sturdy table and chairs, the clean floors he had scrubbed 3 times before her arrival. She ran one finger along the windowsill, checking for dust from habit, and seemed pleased to find none. "You keep it very neat." She turned to him with a question in her eyes. "Do you cook?" "Badly," Calvin admitted. "I can make a few basic things without poisoning myself, but I would not call it proper cooking." "Then perhaps I can be useful." Winifred moved toward the kitchen area, taking in the cast iron stove, the simple shelves, the basic supplies. "I am a good cook. Eliza and I managed on very little, but I learned to make it taste like something." "Your room is upstairs." Calvin said it carefully, wanting her to understand. "The main bedroom. I have been sleeping in the smaller room, and I will continue to do so. I know we are meant to be married, but I thought, with us being strangers, you might want time to adjust. We can marry at the church when you feel ready, and until then, you are safe here. I give you my word." Winifred turned to face him fully, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes, though she blinked them back with fierce determination. "You are giving me your room. It is bigger, has the better window. It seemed right." Calvin felt awkward under her gaze, unsure if he had said something wrong. "Mr. Brooks, Calvin, I have to be honest with you." She took a breath, gathering courage. "I came here with almost nothing. This dress, a change of undergarments, one other dress that is even more worn than this one, my sister's letter, and 17 cents. That is the sum total of everything I own in this world. I was prepared to marry you immediately, to do whatever you required, because I had nowhere else to go. But you are offering me time, safety, your own room." A tear escaped despite her best efforts, trailing down her cheek. "I did not expect kindness." Calvin crossed to her before he could think better of it, stopping just close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "Winifred, I wrote that advertisement because I want a partner, not a servant or something bought and paid for. I want someone to build this ranch with, to share the work and the rewards. Maybe in time we will have affection too, real affection, but I do not expect you to pretend feelings you do not have. So we will take time, get to know each other proper, and when we both feel ready, we will make it official. Does that sound fair?" She nodded, another tear falling, and then to his surprise she reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. "That sounds more than fair. It sounds like hope." They stood there for a moment, hands joined, strangers beginning the long journey toward becoming something more, and through the window the Montana sun poured golden light across the room like a blessing. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Winifred rose with the sun and had breakfast ready by the time Calvin came in from the morning chores, the small kitchen filled with smells that made the house feel like a home. She worked through the days with focused determination, mending his worn clothes, organizing supplies, scrubbing floors that Calvin had always considered clean until he saw how they looked under her care. She planted a kitchen garden near the house, coaxing seeds into life with a tenderness that made him wonder what else those careful hands might nurture. Calvin caught himself watching her more than he should, the way she hummed while she worked, how she talked to the chickens like they were old friends, the rare smile that transformed her whole face when something pleased her. She was always proper, always careful to maintain a respectful distance, but sometimes their hands would brush reaching for the same dish at dinner, or their eyes would meet across the room, and Calvin felt something growing between them that had nothing to do with convenience and everything to do with genuine connection. 3 weeks after her arrival, Calvin came in from the north pasture earlier than usual, worried about a fence section that needed repair before the cattle could drift too far. He found Winifred at the kitchen table, that precious letter spread before her, tears streaming silently down her face as she traced the words with one finger. "Winifred," he spoke gently, not wanting to startle her. She looked up quickly, trying to wipe the tears away, embarrassed to be caught in such a private moment. "I am sorry, I should not be sitting idle. You work harder than anyone I know, you are entitled to rest." Calvin grabbed a chair and sat beside her, close but not touching. "Is it your sister?" Winifred nodded, her fingers still resting on the letter. She would have loved it here. All this space, the mountains in the distance, the way the sky seems to go on forever. I wish she could have seen it. "Tell me about her," Calvin said. "What was she like?" And Winifred did, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam, all the stories she had been holding inside. She told him about Eliza's laugh, how she could find humor in the darkest situations, how she had dreamed of traveling the world despite never having money to leave Philadelphia. She described the games they played as children, the way Eliza would make up stories to pass the time, her fierce loyalty and quick temper and generous heart. Calvin listened, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, his eyes soft with sympathy during the sad ones. When she finally wound down, wrung out from the remembering, he said quietly, "She sounds like she was remarkable. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you." Winifred managed a small smile. "She always told me I should find someone kind. I think she would approve of this choice." "Can I ask you something?" Calvin waited for her nod. "That first day you said you had 17 cents. Where did all your money go, truly? Medical bills cannot have taken everything." Winifred's expression tightened, and for a moment Calvin thought she would not answer. Then she sighed, folding the letter carefully. "Eliza's employer, the family she worked for as a maid, they claimed she stole a silver candlestick. She did not, I know she did not, but they threatened to have her arrested unless we paid for it. 2 months' wages, which we could not afford, but what choice did we have? So I paid it, and then the medical bills started coming, and it was like drowning. Every time I thought we might surface, another wave pulled us under. That is theft, what they did to you." Calvin felt anger kindle in his chest for these people he had never met, people who would kick those already down. Perhaps, but who would believe us over them? They were respectable, we were nobody. Winifred shrugged, the gesture holding years of hard lessons learned. "It is over now. I am here and I am grateful for it." Calvin reached out and covered her hand with his, a bold gesture but one that felt right. "You are not nobody, not here. Here you are my partner, my equal. I want you to understand that." Winifred turned her hand palm up, threading her fingers through his, and Calvin felt his heart skip at the deliberate intimacy of it. "I am beginning to believe you mean that. I do." He squeezed her hand gently. "And I have been thinking, if you are willing, maybe we could ride out to the north pasture tomorrow. I could show you more of the ranch, and you could tell me if you have ideas for improvements. You have a good eye for what is needed. I would like that." Winifred smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her that reached all the way to her eyes. "I would like that very much." They rode out the next morning on 2 of Calvin's steadiest horses, Winifred sitting astride with her worn skirt hitched up practically. Having confessed she had ridden as a girl, though it had been years since she had the opportunity. Calvin watched her settle into the saddle with competent ease, adjusting her stirrups and gathering the reins with practiced hands, and felt another piece of his heart shift toward her. The land stretched before them in rolling waves of green, spring grass lush from recent rains, wildflowers dotting the landscape in splashes of yellow and purple. Calvin showed her the creek that cut through his property, the water clear and cold from mountain snowmelt, explained his plans for expanding the herd, pointed out where he hoped to build a bigger barn when finances allowed. Winifred asked smart questions about water rights and grazing rotation, about predators and weather patterns, and Calvin realized she was studying this with genuine interest, seeing the ranch not as his but as theirs, something they might build together. They dismounted near a stand of cottonwoods, letting the horses drink from the creek, and sat together on a fallen log to rest. "It is peaceful here." Winifred tilted her face toward the sun, her eyes closed, and Calvin studied the curve of her jaw, the soft skin of her throat, feeling desire stir alongside the affection that had been growing steadily. Philadelphia was so loud all the time, so crowded. Even when I was alone, I never felt like I could breathe properly. But here, even with you beside me, I feel like I have room to be myself. "Who is yourself?" Calvin asked. "Who is Winifred Waters when she has room to breathe?" She opened her eyes and turned to look at him, something vulnerable in her expression. "I am still figuring that out. I spent so long just trying to survive, to keep Eliza safe, that I never thought much about what I wanted beyond making it to the next day. But here, with you giving me space to discover it, I am beginning to think about what I might want." "And what do you want?" Calvin's voice came out lower than he intended, rough with things he was not quite ready to name. Winifred held his gaze, her gray eyes serious. "I want a home. A real one, not just a place to sleep, but somewhere I belong. I want to be useful, to matter to someone. And I think maybe I want what you mentioned before, affection. The real kind." Calvin's breath caught. "Winifred, I need to be honest with you. It stopped being just about needing help around the ranch about 2 weeks ago. Now when I see you, when I talk to you, I find myself thinking about you when I should be thinking about work. I look forward to meals not because I am hungry, but because it means time with you. And I know we agreed to take things slow, but I want you to know where I stand. I am already feeling things for you, real things, and they are growing stronger every day." Her hand found his again, that gesture that was becoming familiar, comfortable, charged with meaning. "I feel it too. It scares me how much I feel it. I came here expecting duty, and instead I am finding something that feels like it might become love given time. Is it too soon to say that?" "No." Calvin lifted his free hand to her face, cupping her cheek gently, giving her every chance to pull away. "No, I do not think it is too soon at all." He kissed her there beneath the cottonwoods, with the creek singing over stones and the horses grazing peacefully nearby. A soft press of lips that held promise and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them had quite expected to find. Winifred made a small sound against his mouth, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, and Calvin felt the last of his reservations dissolve like morning frost under sun. When they pulled back, Winifred was blushing, her eyes bright, and she laughed a little breathlessly. "Oh, that was quite nice. Just nice," Calvin could not help teasing, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Wonderful," she corrected, laughing again. "It was wonderful. Do you think we might do it again?" So he kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and felt her respond with growing confidence, her fingers curling into his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Calvin rested his forehead against hers and said, "Marry me. Not because of the arrangement, not because you need somewhere to stay, but because I am falling in love with you and I want you as my wife in every way. Marry me, Winifred." "Yes." She said it without hesitation, smiling so wide it looked like it might split her face. "Yes, Calvin, I will marry you. I want that more than I can say." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Palisade, with the minister's wife and the general store owner standing as witnesses. Winifred wore the better of her 2 dresses, which Calvin had watched her carefully mend and press the night before, and she carried wildflowers Calvin had picked that morning, purple lupines and yellow balsam root tied with a ribbon from the general store. Calvin wore his Sunday best and tried not to let his hands shake as he slid a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had ordered weeks ago in a fit of optimism that now felt like providence. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Calvin he could kiss his bride, he did so with his whole heart and felt Winifred kiss him back with equal fervor, both of them grinning like fools when they finally pulled apart to scattered applause from the handful of townspeople who had gathered to witness the ceremony. The ride back to the ranch felt different now, weighted with new expectations and promises made before God and witnesses. Calvin helped Winifred down from the wagon, and she stood looking up at the house with something between excitement and nerves dancing in her eyes. "It is strange," she said quietly. "This morning I rode away as Winifred Waters, alone in the world, and now I return as Winifred Brooks, with a husband and a home and a whole new life ahead of me." "Strange good or strange bad?" Calvin asked, offering his arm. She took it, leaning into his side with a trust that made his chest tight. "Strange wonderful, strange like a dream I am afraid I will wake from. You will not wake because it is real." He led her up the porch steps, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms, making her laugh and grab onto his shoulders. "I believe this is traditional." Calvin carried her over the threshold, into the house that was now truly theirs, and set her down gently in the front room. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything golden, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other, husband and wife, strangers who had become something more in the space of a few short weeks. "Are you nervous?" Calvin asked because he certainly was, aware that the night ahead held new intimacies and vulnerabilities they had not yet navigated. "A little," Winifred admitted. "Are you terrified?" He laughed at his own honesty. "I want everything to be right, and I am afraid I will do something wrong." Winifred reached up and touched his face, her palm gentle against his jaw. "I think if we are honest with each other, if we keep talking like we have been, we will figure it out together. That is the nice thing about being partners. Neither of us has to have all the answers alone." Calvin turned his head to kiss her palm, then took her hand and led her toward the stairs. "I moved my things into the main bedroom this morning, our bedroom now, if that is all right." "More than all right." She followed him up, her hand secure in his. "Show me our room, husband." He did, and what happened next was tender and awkward and achingly sweet. Two people learning each other with patience and care, stumbling through unfamiliarity toward pleasure and connection. Winifred was shy but curious, and Calvin tried to be gentle while his desire ran hot beneath his skin. And by the time the moon rose silver through the window, they lay tangled together in the sheets, her head on his chest, both of them flushed and satisfied, and a little amazed at what they had discovered in each other. "I did not know it could be like that," Winifred whispered against his skin. "No one tells you it can be good, that it can feel like something you want rather than something you endure." Calvin stroked her hair, his other arm tight around her waist, holding her close. "It will get even better as we learn what we each like. We have all the time in the world to figure it out." She tilted her head back to look at him, her eyes soft in the moonlight. "I love you. I know it is fast. I know people would say it is too soon, but I do. I love you, Calvin Brooks." "I love you too." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I loved you when you stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified but determined. I loved you when you cried over your sister's letter. I loved you when you planted that garden like you were putting down roots. I have been falling in love with you since the moment you arrived with nothing but that letter, and now you have everything. Everything I can give you, everything we can build together. That is my promise to you." Winifred kissed him again, deep and thorough, and they made love a second time with more confidence and less fumbling, learning the language of each other's bodies, writing the first pages of a story that would span the rest of their lives. The summer that followed their marriage was one of hard work and growing prosperity. Calvin taught Winifred to rope cattle, and she proved to have a natural talent for it despite her small size. She taught him to cook properly, and soon the ranch hands were finding excuses to stop by around mealtimes, drawn by the smells of real food coming from the kitchen. They worked side by side through the long days, then fell into bed together at night, sometimes too tired for anything but sleep, sometimes finding energy for passion that left them both breathless and laughing. In August, Winifred missed her monthly courses, and by September there was no denying the new life growing inside her. Calvin was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, suddenly paranoid about every little thing she did, trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup, until she finally sat him down and explained in patient detail that pregnant women had been doing ranch work since ranches were invented, and she had no intention of being an invalid for 9 months. "But what if something happens?" Calvin worried, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "What if I cannot protect you? Then you will deal with it, and I will deal with it, and we will face it together like we face everything else." Winifred covered his hand with hers. "But Calvin, you have to let me live my life. I am not fragile. I survived losing my parents and my sister, poverty and grief, and crossing half the country alone. Carrying our child is not going to break me." He kissed her then, knowing she was right, loving her strength even as his heart clenched with the fear of losing her. "All right, but you have to promise to tell me if something feels wrong, if you need help. Promise me that, I promise." She kissed him back, then smiled against his lips. "Now, can we please go check the south fence like we planned? The cattle will not wait for your anxiety to settle." The baby came in early April, on a day when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom and the creek ran high with snowmelt. The labor was long and hard, and Calvin paced the downstairs like a caged animal while the minister's wife attended Winifred upstairs, occasionally coming down to request more hot water or clean towels. He had never felt so helpless in his life, hearing Winifred cry out with pain and being unable to do anything to ease it. When the baby finally came, a healthy boy with Calvin's dark hair and Winifred's gray eyes, Calvin sat beside the bed with tears streaming down his face, holding his son with shaking hands while Winifred looked on with exhausted pride. "He is perfect," Calvin whispered, unable to take his eyes off the tiny face. "He is absolutely perfect. We should name him Elijah," Winifred said softly, "after my sister Eliza, something to honor her memory." Calvin looked up at his wife, this woman who had come to him with nothing but a letter and had given him everything that mattered, and nodded. "Elijah Brooks, it is a strong name. She would be proud. I think she would." Winifred reached out to touch their son's tiny hand, wonder in her face. "I wish she could meet him." "We will tell him about her," Calvin promised. "We will make sure he knows about the brave aunt he never met, who helped bring his mother to Montana so we could find each other." They raised Elijah with stories about Eliza, about Philadelphia and the journey west, about courage and survival and love that grows in unexpected places. The boy thrived on the ranch, learning to ride almost before he could walk, following Calvin around with determined toddler steps, listening with rapt attention to everything his mother taught him. 2 years after Elijah's birth, Winifred gave them a daughter, small and fierce with auburn hair like her mother. They named her Clara after Calvin's mother, and she grew up chasing her brother through the fields, learning to cook at her mother's side, riding herd with her father when she was old enough. 3 years after Clara came another boy, Thomas, quiet and thoughtful, who loved books as much as horses and made them all laugh with his dry observations about life. The ranch grew as the family did. Calvin expanded the herd, built that bigger barn he had dreamed of, added rooms onto the house to accommodate their growing family. Winifred's kitchen garden became legendary in Palisade, her vegetables taking prizes at the county fair, her preserves sought after by neighbors. They built a life that was rich not in money, though they did well enough, but in love and purpose and the bone-deep satisfaction of building something together from nothing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Calvin and Winifred rode back out to that stand of cottonwoods by the creek, leaving the children with the ranch hands for a rare afternoon alone. They spread a blanket under the same trees where they had first kissed, where Calvin had first asked her to marry him, and lay together looking up at the sky through the leaves. "You ever regret it?" Calvin asked, his fingers threaded through hers. Answering that advertisement, coming west, marrying a stranger, Winifred turned onto her side to look at him, propping herself up on one elbow. "Never. Not for a single moment. My life began the day I stepped off that stagecoach. Everything before was just surviving. This us, our children, the ranch, this is living. You were so scared that day." Calvin reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture automatic after years of similar touches, trying so hard to be brave. "I was terrified," she admitted with a laugh. "I thought you might take one look at me and send me back. I had 17 cents and a letter from my dead sister and nothing else to offer. I felt like the poorest person in the world. But I told you that day, and I will tell you again now." Calvin pulled her down for a kiss, slow and sweet with the familiarity of long practice. "You arrived with nothing but that letter, and I said you have everything now. I meant it then, and I mean it more now. You brought yourself, Winifred, your courage and your strength and your heart. That was everything. That was all I needed." Winifred's eyes filled with tears, the happy kind that came from being understood completely. "You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I was alone, a purpose when I was lost. You gave me everything too, Calvin, everything that matters." They made love there under the cottonwoods like they had done countless times over the years. Their bodies familiar but never boring, always finding new ways to express what they felt. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other with the sound of the creek running nearby and the wind rustling through the leaves overhead, content in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and true. The years continued to roll by with the changing seasons. Elijah grew into a strong young man who worked the ranch with his father, who had Calvin's steady patience and Winifred's quick mind. Clara proved to have a talent with horses that amazed everyone, training them with a gentle touch and an intuitive understanding of what each animal needed. Thomas went off to study law in Helena, his parents proud even as they missed him, knowing he would make his own mark on the world. Winifred and Calvin grew older together, their hair silvering, lines deepening around their eyes from years of squinting into the Montana sun and smiling at each other across dinner table and rooms full of family. They added grandchildren to the mix, as Elijah married a girl from town and Clara found love with a neighboring rancher's son. The house that had once seemed so empty now bursting with noise and life and joy. On Calvin's 60th birthday, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 generations of the family they had built sat around the expanded dinner table, eating food prepared from recipes Winifred had perfected over decades, telling stories that got more exaggerated with each retelling, laughing until their sides hurt. Calvin looked down the table to where Winifred sat, her hair completely white now but her eyes as bright as the day she stepped off that stagecoach, and felt overwhelming gratitude wash over him. After dinner, when the younger ones were occupied with games and the babies were being put to bed, Calvin took Winifred's hand and led her out to the porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years, watching the sun set over their land. They settled into the rocking chairs Calvin had built for their 25th anniversary, still holding hands, content, with the comfortable silence that had replaced the need for constant conversation. "You remember what I was thinking the first time we sat on this porch together?" Winifred asked, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of his hand. "Tell me," Calvin smiled, knowing but wanting to hear her say it. "I was thinking that I had traveled so far and ended up somewhere I never imagined with a man I did not know, and I should have been terrified. But instead, I felt like I was finally where I was supposed to be, like I had been lost my whole life and only just found my way home." She turned to look at him, her lined face still beautiful to him after all these years. "I was right. This was always where I was meant to end up. You were always who I was meant to find." "I think Eliza knew somehow," Calvin said, voicing a thought he had carried for years. "When she told you to go west, to not stay in Philadelphia, I think somehow she knew you would find this life waiting for you. I like to think so." Winifred smiled, that private smile she reserved for moments when she was remembering her sister. "I like to think she is watching somehow, seeing the family we built, knowing her push got me here. I hope she is proud." "She would be. How could she not be?" Calvin squeezed her hand. "You survived, you thrived. You built a whole life out of nothing but determination and courage. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Winifred Brooks. I had help." She leaned over to kiss his cheek. "I had a partner who saw me as an equal from the very start, who gave me room to figure out who I was, who loved me not despite my past but including all of it. You made it possible, Calvin. All of this, everything we built, we did it together." They sat together as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple and pink, painting the Montana sky with colors that never got old no matter how many times they witnessed them. Behind them in the house, they could hear their family laughing and talking, the sounds of multiple generations living and loving in the home they had created. "I would do it all again," Calvin said quietly. "Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of fear or worry. I would do it all exactly the same to end up right here, right now with you." "So would I," Winifred agreed. "Though maybe next time I could arrive with more than 17 cents and a letter." Calvin laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. "No, you arrived with exactly what you needed. That letter from your sister gave you courage to take the leap. The 17 cents showed you knew how to survive. And you, yourself, that was all I ever wanted or needed. You are my everything, Winifred. You always have been. And you are mine." She rested her head on his shoulder, fitting against him like she had been designed to be there. "My home, my heart, my everything." They stayed there until the stars came out, one by one, the Montana sky vast and clear above them. Inside, their children and grandchildren continued their celebration, creating new memories in the house that love had built. The ranch spread around them, 300 cattle grown to over 1,000 over the years, pastures Calvin and Winifred had walked together countless times, the creek that had witnessed their first kiss still running clear and cold through the property. Winifred thought about the girl she had been, stepping off that stagecoach with everything she owned in a single small bag, terrified and alone and desperate. She thought about Eliza's letter, still carefully preserved in a drawer upstairs, the words nearly memorized from all the times she had read them over the years. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the pain and loss that had seemed unbearable at the time, but had ultimately led to more joy than she could have imagined. Calvin thought about the lonely rancher he had been, drafting that advertisement with hope and uncertainty, wondering if anyone would answer, if he would spend his life alone in this beautiful empty place. He thought about the moment Winifred stepped off that stagecoach, small and scared but determined, clutching her sister's letter like a talisman. He thought about how quickly she had filled up all the empty spaces in his life, how completely she had become the center of everything that mattered. As the night deepened, and the temperature dropped the way it always did in Montana even in summer, they finally went inside, Calvin's arm around Winifred's shoulders, her arm around his waist. They said goodnight to their family, hugged their grandchildren, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for decades. "You know what the best part is?" Winifred asked as they got ready for bed, following the routine they had perfected over the years. "What is that?" Calvin pulled back the covers, the bed they had made love in, slept in, argued in, comforted each other in through sickness and sorrow and joy. "The best part is that after all these years, after building this whole life together, I still get excited when you walk into a room. My heart still skips a little when you smile at me. I still want you, still love you, still choose you every single day." She slid into bed beside him, finding her spot against his side like she had thousands of times before. "It never got boring or routine or something I took for granted. You are still my great adventure, Calvin Brooks. You are mine too." He wrapped his arms around her, his face in her hair that smelled of the lavender soap she had been making for years. "Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. Every day with you is a gift I never take for granted." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, their breathing synchronizing the way it did after decades of sleeping side by side. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and beautiful over the ranch they had built together, over the family they had created, over the life they had forged from nothing but hope and courage and love. The mail-order bride had arrived with nothing but a letter, and the rancher had been right when he told her she had everything now. But what he had not known then, what it had taken years to fully understand, was that she had not just received everything. She had brought everything with her, and together they had multiplied it, grown it, nurtured it into something neither of them could have created alone. That was the real gift, the real miracle of what they had found together. Not that he had saved her, or she had saved him, but that they had saved each other. Two lonely people who had taken a chance on hope and found more than they ever dreamed possible. A home, a family, a love that lasted through decades and challenges and changes, growing deeper and stronger with every passing year. As the years continued to advance, Calvin and Winifred remained active on the ranch well into their 70s, though they gradually let Elijah and his wife take over more of the day-to-day management. They spent their time teaching their grandchildren everything they had learned, passing down not just skills but values, stories, the history of how their family had begun. When Winifred was 73, she gathered all the grandchildren one afternoon and brought out Eliza's letter, now carefully preserved in a frame, the paper yellowed but the words still clear. She read it to them, her voice steady despite the emotion always near the surface when she thought of her sister. "My dearest Winnie," she read, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I need you to listen to me one last time. Do not waste your life mourning me. Do not stay in this city that has brought us nothing but hardship. Go west, like we always talked about. Go find adventure, find love, find a life worth living. I know you think you need to stay because of loyalty to my memory, but the greatest tribute you can give me is to be happy. Promise me you will try. Promise me you will not give up on your own dreams just because mine ended too soon. I love you always, and I will be watching over you wherever you go. Your sister, Eliza. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, some of them hearing the full story for the first time. The youngest granddaughter, Sarah, who was 8 years old and had Eliza's same adventurous spirit, asked, "Did you keep your promise, Grandma? Did you find happiness?" Winifred looked across the room to where Calvin sat in his favorite chair, his eyes on her with the same love and warmth they had held for 5 decades. She looked at her children, at her grandchildren, at the beautiful life that surrounded her. "Yes, sweetheart, I kept my promise. I found more happiness than I knew was possible. Your great-aunt Eliza gave me permission to live, and I did. I really did." Calvin died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Winifred beside him as she had been for 52 years. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, her tears falling silently as she told him one last time that she loved him, that he had been everything to her, that she would carry him in her heart until they met again. The funeral drew people from all over the territory, ranchers and townspeople whose lives Calvin had touched in ways large and small. They shared stories of his fairness, his kindness, his quiet strength, and Winifred listened with pride and sorrow intertwined. When they lowered him into the ground in the small cemetery outside Palisade, she placed a single wildflower on his coffin, a purple lupine like the ones he had picked for her wedding bouquet so many years ago. Winifred lived another 4 years after Calvin's death, staying on the ranch with Elijah and his family. She remained active and engaged, teaching her great-grandchildren to cook, tending her garden, taking daily walks to the cottonwood trees by the creek where she and Calvin had shared so many important moments. She spoke often of him, keeping his memory alive with stories that made people laugh and cry in equal measure. On a warm spring afternoon, 3 months after her 83rd birthday, Winifred took her usual walk to the cottonwoods. Elijah found her there several hours later, sitting with her back against a tree, her eyes closed, a peaceful smile on her face. She had simply stopped, her heart giving out while surrounded by the beauty of the land she had loved for more than 50 years. In her hand, they found a letter, not her sister's but one written in her own careful script, dated that very morning. Elijah opened it with trembling hands and read aloud to his family that evening. "My dearest family, if you are reading this, then I have gone to be with Calvin, and I could not be happier about it. Do not mourn for me. I have lived a life beyond my wildest dreams. I came to Montana with nothing, scared and alone, and I found everything. I found love, real and lasting. I found purpose and home. I found all of you. Calvin once told me that I arrived with nothing but a letter, and now I had everything, and he was right. But what I learned over our years together is that the greatest gift was not what I received, but what we built. Together we created something that will last long after we are both gone. This ranch, this family, this legacy of love and hard work and staying true to your word. That is what matters. So live your lives fully. Love deeply and honestly. Take chances on hope. Build something that lasts. And know that I am at peace, grateful for every single day I was given, for every person who came into my life." Tell the story of the mail-order bride who arrived with nothing and the rancher who gave her everything. Tell it to your children and your children's children. Let it remind them that love can begin in the most unexpected ways and grow into something that transforms everything. With all my love, Winifred Brooks. They buried her next to Calvin, their graves side by side overlooking the ranch they had built together, and on the shared headstone they inscribed the words that had defined their story. She arrived with nothing but a letter. He said she had everything now. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued for generations after them, passing from Elijah to his children to his grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation Calvin and Winifred had laid. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained at its heart, preserved carefully. The cottonwood trees by the creek became a family landmark, a place where proposals happened and anniversaries were celebrated, and people went when they needed to feel close to the legacy of the couple who had started it all. Eliza's letter and Winifred's final letter were preserved together, displayed in the ranch house main room, a reminder of the power of courage and love and the importance of keeping promises. Children grew up hearing the story of their great-great-grandmother who had traveled across the country alone, who had taken a chance on a stranger, who had built a life of purpose and meaning from nothing but determination and an open heart. The story became part of the ranch's identity, part of what made the Brooks family who they were. When times got hard, when challenges seemed insurmountable, someone would invariably say, "Remember Winifred. She started with 17 cents and a letter." And somehow that would be enough to keep going, to find the strength to face whatever came, to believe that better days were ahead if you were willing to work for them. In the town of Palisade, now grown from a handful of buildings to a proper small city, the story of Calvin and Winifred Brooks became local legend, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But the core remained true. A lonely rancher and a desperate woman who had found each other through an advertisement, who had built one of the most successful ranches in Montana, who had loved each other with a devotion that lasted until death and beyond. Historians later studying the settlement of Montana Territory would sometimes mention the Brooks Ranch as an example of how mail-order bride arrangements could succeed, how they were not always the desperate, loveless transactions portrayed in fiction. They would note that Winifred Brooks had become one of the most respected women in the territory, that her business acumen had been as important to the ranch's success as her husband's physical labor, that she had been a true partner in every sense of the word. But what the historians could not capture, what remained the private truth of the family, was the depth of what Calvin and Winifred had meant to each other. The way they had looked at each other across rooms full of people and communicated whole conversations with a glance. The way they had faced every challenge together, neither one trying to dominate or control but working in genuine partnership. The way their love had grown deeper with time rather than fading, each year adding layers of intimacy and understanding. That was the real legacy, more valuable than the land or the cattle or the material success. They had shown their children and grandchildren and all the generations that followed what real love looked like. Patient, enduring, built on respect and honest communication, strong enough to weather any storm. They had proven that taking chances on hope was worthwhile, that courage could be rewarded, that love could begin in unlikely places and grow into something that changed everything. The mail-order bride arrived with nothing but a letter, and the rancher said she had everything now, and they were both right. She brought everything that mattered: courage, determination, an open heart, the willingness to try. He gave everything that mattered: respect, partnership, love that saw her as an equal, space to become fully herself. Together they created everything: a home, a family, a legacy, a love story that would be remembered and retold for generations. And on warm spring afternoons, when the wind blew just right through the cottonwood trees by the creek. People swore they could hear laughter, could sense the presence of two souls who had found each other against all odds and had built something that truly lasted. The land remembered them, held their story in the soil and the water and the endless Montana sky. The family they created carried their legacy forward, living by the values they had demonstrated, believing in the power of love and partnership, and never giving up on hope. That was their triumph, their gift to the future. Proof that love could transform everything, that two people coming together with honest hearts and genuine partnership could create something far greater than the sum of their parts. The mail-order bride and the rancher, Winifred and Calvin, two lonely souls who took a chance and found forever. Their story ended as all stories must, but what they built lived on, proof that love, real love, never truly dies. It multiplies and grows and touches everyone it encounters, rippling forward through time, changing lives, giving hope to those who need it most. And that, in the end, was everything.